Capture One Pro for desktop is an app that is, for reasons that completely escape me, well respected, dare I even say loved, by a decent percentage of serious or professional photographers. So when the Capture One team decided to leverage their serious reputation and launch apps for mobile devices, it's fair to say that there was a decent amount of pent-up anticipation in tethered shooting circles. Lightroom's been available on smartphones for over 5 years now, and it honestly felt like Capture One were never going to release a mobile version of their application. And now that they have, and now that I've spent some time testing the newly released Capture One app for iPhone, I can honestly state, hand on heart, that they really shouldn't have fucking bothered. Capture One for iPhone is amongst the worst mobile photo editors I've ever used. And let me tell you, I've tried most of them, going all the way back to the pre-Instagram, Hipstermatic and Afterlight days. It's an app that feels like it was written by a 15-year-old work experience intern over the course of a few hurried lunch hours while they simultaneously played Candy Crush Saga. So without further ado, let's dive into this amateurish shit show and break down precisely why I think that Capture One are taking the piss. Let's start with the interface, or rather, the almost complete lack of it. This is an app that feels like someone chucked a bunch of default library blocks on the screen in a Chinese iPhone app creator. It feels thrown together and aimless and about as polished as a Trump apartment complex. By way of illustrating my point, take a look at that histogram. Why does it occupy 2/3 of the screen? Why is it on the right side of the display and not, I don't know, in the centre? Now, in Capture One's defence, I should point out that Lightroom Mobile has a similarly weird small histogram, and so perhaps the Capture One app intern simply decided to copy one of the only bad things about Lightroom Mobile. The rest of the interface is monumentally uninspiring. Photo plonked in the middle and 5 icons so generic that they should have dispensed with them completely and just used the titles. Tapping on the photo zooms in, double tapping makes it full screen. Turn the phone sideways and fuck all happens because there is no landscape mode, just vanilla portrait orientation. Tapping on one of those icons opens that section up and you're presented with some very un-Apple looking amorphous grey buttons with microfiche sized text titles in the centre of them. There's no pleasing looking animation at work, no smooth transition from one section into another, no effort whatsoever to do anything other than the absolute bare minimum. Compare this interior navigation with the beautifully smooth drawers which emerge elegantly from the base of the screen in Lightroom Mobile. Using Lightroom Mobile feels like you're being seduced in elegant and sophisticated ways, while Capture One feels like a reluctant, nihilistic shag up against the cistern in a public toilet. There's no design language at work in this app at all. None. It feels like it was built in Windows XP era Microsoft Paint. So yes, the entire interface is shit. But what about the functionality, you may be thinking? We can, after all, sort of forgive a shitty interface if the end results are good, can't we? If only that was the case. Let's go section by section, starting with the review screen. In many ways, the review screen sums up the utter Brechtian hopelessness of this app. It's so empty and pointless that you really do have to wonder why they bothered. There are 2 buttons, rating and tagging. Rating lets you give a photo a score of between 1 and 5, which is fair enough, I guess. The white deserves an entire screen of its own is beyond me. Tagging, meanwhile, doesn't actually let you properly tag anything. Dear me, no, it just lets you choose a colour. When I think of the word tag, I think of a keyword or a hashtag, such as sunset or wedding. But there is no keyword tagging in here at all, not even in the metadata screen. Meanwhile, and I make no apologies about continually comparing this app to Adobe's, but Lightroom Mobile lets you do everything. Review, rate, pick, add keywords, change the title, caption, copyright, all of it. And that is the review screen in all its dizzying complexity. Then we have the styles screen. Styles are, as you might expect, presets. Little post-processing shortcuts that enable you to quickly apply a specific style of edit to a photograph. I'm not a huge fan of presets on desktop apps, but I can see their value on mobile when you simply want to quickly give your photo a certain look before sharing it on your socials. In fact, presets and filters are, I would say, one of the most important features of any mobile photo editor. Capture One decided to really push the boat out with their presets, supplying their paying customers with 14 of them. You get 3 base edits, all contrast tweaks, 2 black and white, 5 creative edits, and 4 film looks, all of which would be well and good, but for the fact that they are all utterly shite. They barely had any effect at all on any of my test images, and I had to repeatedly flick between the preset and the undo button to try and see any changes at all. I'm no fan of that oversaturated fantasy imagery you get on Instagram, but I do expect a preset to have some impact on my image, apart from making it look shittier than before. If you're keeping score at home, then you might like to know that there are several hundred presets in Lightroom Mobile, including clever machine learning powered adaptive presets. Anyway, moving on, and the next screen is the crop. And in that crop screen, you get crop, rotation, and keystone options. These work as expected, but I was amazed at how Capture One's programming prowess managed to make my top-of-the-range iPhone 14 Pro Max look about as powerful as the kind of Android phones they sell in the post office. Dragging the sliders in the keystone screen made the photo preview not grow and shrink with buttery smoothness, but instead judder, invisible steps. I don't know what the actual frame rate was, but if I had to guess, I'd guess it was about 2. Then we come to the most important part of the app, the adjustment screen, and access to Capture One's famous RAW engine. The adjustments are split up into sections titled black and white, white balance, exposure, HDR, clarity, dehaze, color editor, and vignetting. Black and white lets you convert your image to black and white, has a series of sliders for the major colors which look like they're supposed to change the black and white conversion in some way. But like the style presets, the color sliders had only the most tepid of impacts on my test images. They had so little impact, in fact, that I have to wonder why they bothered including them at all. Unless it's some really clever virtual fidget spinner for people with ADHD like me. The white balance tool works as expected, and you can either manually set a color temperature with the Kelvin slider or a standard preset such as tungsten or cloudy. But there's no eyedropper to select a color from the photo itself. The exposure tool contains sliders for exposure, contrast, brightness, and saturation. I'd probably have put saturation in its own section with other color specific sliders, but that's just me. The sliders in the exposure tool also showcase one of the stupidest design decisions in the entire stupidly designed app, and that's the stupidly random numbering scale on the sliders. Saturation goes up to 100, but brightness only goes up to 50. Why? Hue only goes up to 30. Sharpening goes all the fucking way to 1000. Why not just pick a standard range and use that for all the sliders? 100 seems like a safe choice. There's no consistency in evidence anywhere in this app. Incidentally, if you swing one of those sliders to the left rather than the right, you can even select -0. I'm guessing that this is just lazy programming and not a clever geeky reference to the mathematical concept of the signed zero as used in statistical mechanics. Moving on to the HDR tool, we have sliders for highlights, shadows, white and black points, but why is this called HDR? These aren't high dynamic range tools, they're just dynamic range tools. HDR is commonly associated with the merging of bracketed shots, not a blanket term for standard pixel brightness levels. In the clarity tool, we have clarity and structure sliders, both of which appear to have virtually no impact on the photo. The dehaze tool, meanwhile, appears to exist only to make your photo look like a Soviet-era lithograph. Turn the slider halfway and it does fuck all. Turn it to 100 and you get weird blotches everywhere. Compare and contrast the dehaze tool with the same in Lightroom Mobile and it's like night and day. Lightroom Mobile is exponentially superior. The color editor tool, meanwhile, only lets you control global saturation and hue, or one of 6 hard-coded colours: red, yellow, green, cyan, purple and magenta. Compare and contrast this with Lightroom Mobile, which not only gives you granular colour mixing, but also full-blown grading with colour wheels. In Capture One, you can't even use a colour picker to select a neutral grey, white or black as your baseline. It's laughably primitive. The final tool is vignetting, which kind of works unless you want any kind of dramatic vignetting. And that's the core of this app, the adjustments, leaving us with just one last tab. The fifth and final section of the app is the sharpening suite, which apparently doesn't count as an adjustment for some reason and gets its own entire section for reasons that completely escape me. Within the sharpening section, you get sharpening, noise reduction, film grain and moire. Why is it called sharpening if this is where you find noise reduction? Don't go expecting anything flash from any of these tools. Certainly not, God forbid, the kind of beautifully honed tools you get in Lightroom Mobile or the kind of machine learning awesomeness you get in something like Pixelmator for iPhone. The sharpening tool has amount, radius, threshold and halo sliders. The ranges of these go from 0 to 1000, 2.5, 12 and 100 respectively. And I had to turn all of those sliders up to their maximum to see any changes whatsoever in my test photos. The noise reduction tool, placed, remember, within the sharpening section of the app, lets you tweak using old-fashioned luminance and colour adjustments. And it works about as well as those old-fashioned adjustments always did. The film grain tool has sliders for impact and granularity and 6 grain presets. This did indeed add grain to my photo, although as with every other tool, you only really notice at the extreme end of the slider's range. Finally, there's the moire tool, which removes moire interference patterns. Once you've finished making all your pointless half-assed edits with Capture One's lauded RAW engine, you can export your photograph. And this is about the only part of this entire app that isn't weirdly limited. You can export in JPEG, TIFF, original or EIP formats using any size or ratio, and you can set quality for JPEGs. So that covers most of Capture One for iPhone's functionality, but there is one feature I haven't mentioned yet, and that's tethering. In fact, if you read the blurb on Capture One's website, it may as well be the core feature. They say, and I quote, Capture One for iPhone is the perfect tool for photographers who want to accelerate their delivery time while preserving high quality work. And who wouldn't want to accelerate their delivery time? This acceleration they refer to is made possible by tethering your camera to your phone by wireless or USB connection. I didn't test this feature, partly because I don't have a USB camera adapter for my iPhone, partly because wireless connectivity is not supported on my Fujifilm X-T4, and partly because I'd lost the will to live by this stage. I do question the entire purpose of tethering with this app though. What use case is it meeting? Is the kind of photographer who uses tethered shooting really going to use their iPhone instead of, I don't know, a slimline laptop such as a Surface Pro or a MacBook Air? I guess if you're putting together some ultra mobile, lightweight tethered shooting setup, then you'd use it, perhaps at a fashion show or a news event of some kind. But don't most pro photographers just use the Photo Mechanic app and a laptop for precisely that purpose? When you install the Capture One iPhone app, you're asked to create or to sign into your Capture One account. In fact, you can't use the app without an account. As part of your subscription to Capture One, you can upload images to the cloud through the app. You can then share the albums you upload and collaborate with others who can comment and rate the images. This is hardly an earth-shattering innovation on Capture One's part, of course. It's been a feature of Lightroom Mobile for years, and as you've probably guessed by now, it's much slicker and infinitely superior experience with the Adobe Cloud. You can't even view any metadata whatsoever in the shared Capture One cloud libraries, just the star rating, that color tag, and comments made by visibly distressed clients. Given how beautifully designed this app is, you're probably wondering how much such a high quality product costs. If you want to use just the iPhone or iPad apps, Capture One are asking for $7.49 per month. That's Australian dollars. It's probably about $5 a month in the US. If you also want the most overrated desktop RAW photo editor on the market, then you could of course get the all-in-one subscription, which is currently, laughably, about $50 a month here in Australia. That all-in-one bundle gets you access to both desktop and mobile versions, so you could, if you want, have the most mediocre raw photo editing apps on any device you like, as long as it's not an Android smartphone or tablet. Believe me, Android users, you dodged a bullet. So that's the Capture One app for iPhone in all its spectacular glory. There is this weird reality distortion field around Capture One's RAW editor. It seems to have a fan base among people who fled from Adobe when they introduced the Creative Cloud subscription, and who, judging by Capture One's own support forums, carry on using it because they hate Adobe, not because Capture One is actually any good. The irony is that Capture One costs a lot more than Adobe photography bundles these days, and is now a software service in exactly the same way as Photoshop and Lightroom are. So, great job on sticking it to the man, guys. If I was one of those Capture One holdouts, belligerently hanging on to my expensive subscription, or paying $500 for a perpetual license that only applies to that specific point release, I'd be a bit upset by the quality of their Apple-only mobile app. It is, as I think I have illustrated, a wholly unsatisfying, woefully designed and intrinsically crippled photo editor that I'd be pissed off with if they were giving it away. That Capture One have the balls to ask for $7.50 a month to use it is even more hilarious when you consider that Lightroom Mobile is available on iOS and Android and can be used, minus some premium features, for free. Pony up for the Adobe Photography Bundle for a very reasonable 15 Australian dollars a month, and you get Lightroom and Photoshop for desktop, tablet and mobile. Photo editors for mobile devices have come a long way since those early years and those early apps like Afterlight. Modern photo editing apps like Pixelmator Pro, Camera Plus, Visco, Polar and Darkroom combine beautiful interface design with powerful editing tools. Any of the aforementioned apps, along with Lightroom Mobile, would be an infinitely better purchasing decision than Capture One for iPhone. Subscription software is now the default for most premium apps, which is frustrating, but it also means that we can hold the developers to account to a far greater degree than we ever could when an app cost $5 outright and could be used for a decade or more. There is simply no excuse for a subscription product as rudimentary and poorly designed as Capture One for iPhone. It is a steaming turd of an app, a botched, half-finished, underdeveloped, migraine-inducing load of old shit. A towering example of mediocrity and apathy and indifference. I do not recommend this product. And that'll do us for this upbeat video, guys. Are you a happy Capture One subscriber? Have you hung on to your AOL subscription too? How about that Book of the Month club? Let me know in the comments section below. If you like this video, please do give it a like and consider subscribing for more spin-free content from yours truly. Till the next time, guys. Ta-ta.